Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where Hollywood is currently reeling from the very sudden death and unexpected death of Brad Grey, one of the most influential people in the history of movie making. It's really quite a big deal. In fact, it's trending on Twitter, which is unusual for a studio executive. Now, you likely know who Brad Grey is because we talk about studio executives here on Beyond the Trailer. They are, of course, instrumental as to what movies you see in theaters. And Brad Grey is behind a lot of the entertainment you've enjoyed over the years, from movies to television. But lately we've been talking about him because of his struggle to stay at Paramount. He was fighting for his job to stay as the head of that studio. And unfortunately, he was ultimately pushed out. He was not able to convince them to allow him to stay because the box office has been so poor. They've been in a tight race with Sony for last place. And it's interesting in that context that he passed away yesterday, Sunday, from cancer, considering he did fight to stay at Paramount. So I think that would lead one to believe that he either felt that he could beat this, or some cancers, tragically, work very quickly. So there's not going to be a lot of fallout from this in terms of content right now, because, again, he was pushed out at Paramount, but he touched so many people's lives and was part of their careers who are huge names in Hollywood. We'll talk about some of them in just a moment. But again, as I said, he is one of the most influential people in the history of movie making. So I want to just tell you a little bit about Brad Grey so you can understand what he accomplished and why it's such a big deal that he's passed away. Also, it's so rare for someone to pass away so suddenly with nobody to know that they were sick at all. Nobody knew. So again, tragically died at the age of 59 of cancer, unspecified cancer, on Sunday, thankfully at least, with his family surrounding him. So when it comes to Hollywood history, I would say that Brad Grey is on par with Mike Ovitz. Now, Michael Ovitz co-founded Creative Artists Agency, CAA, and it became one of the most, if not the most powerful agency in Tinseltown. And he became famous for packaging. That's what he did. He was the one who started this idea that an agency and not a studio would decide who would direct, write, and star in a movie, and then sell the whole package to the studio. Kind of moving the studio system of the old days in Hollywood from the studios to the agencies. And the reason the agencies like that is because it gives them more control over the movie, and they also like getting all those percentages. They get the commission for every single person who's involved with the film. And also people want to be represented by the agency because that's how they'll get work, because they want to be part of those packages. So Michael Ovitz himself went on to Disney, as you might recall. He was hired there. He stopped being someone who represents talent to someone who straight out makes movies. And that did not go well. And in fact, his hiring was what made Jeffrey Katzenberg decide to leave Disney and strike out on his own to help form DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg and Geffen, and of course DreamWorks Animation. But anyway, it didn't work out at Disney, and he got one of the biggest golden parachutes in the history of Hollywood. So the reason I bring up Mike Ovitz is because he's such an important name when it comes to the evolution of what an agent does in the movie business. Well, Brad Grey does the same thing for managers. Now, for those of you who don't know, agents and managers fulfill two very different purposes. An agent largely, well, there is some crossover. Sometimes people just have one or the other. But for the most part, a manager tries to guide your career long term, whereas an agent has usually sometimes more clients, and they're more into the minutia of your contract, and also this packaging situation. All right. So here's another big difference that Brad Grey helped to usher in. So while agencies can package you, managers can produce your content. And so Brillstein-Grey, which Brad Grey co-founded, became one of the biggest and most powerful, if not the biggest and most powerful, management company and production company in Hollywood. They had an amazing roster of clients, and they would produce their television shows. For instance, infamously the Larry Sanders Show, because that ended up being a lawsuit where Gary Shandling felt that he was not being paid his due. But also producing a number of movies for their clients. And things went so well that Brad Grey eventually formed Plan B with Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt, which of course ultimately he left to go to Paramount. They hired him to run the studio. And then when Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt divorced, Brad Pitt got Plan B in the custody battle. So anyway, Brad Grey went to Paramount, and it wasn't a Mike Ovitz situation at first. He did very well. He ran the studio for over a decade, and then it was only, again, recently pushed out. One of the reasons he fought so hard for his job was to say, hey, you know, everybody has like a bad run. I've done quite well for the studio for a long time initially. So again, it's very similar to Mike Ovitz's situation about going for, you know, defining a job in Hollywood, actually redefining a job in Hollywood, giving it much more power than it ever had before, then going over to the studio side, and then, you know, to his credit, Grey lasted a heck of a lot longer than Ovitz. So it's quite tragic that he passed away. I'm sure you'll see, and they're already popping up, a number of people giving their condolences and talking about how important he was not only to them, but to Hollywood. And he's a name to know. He's an incredibly influential name to know. And of course, his passing, especially at such a young age, is tragic all by itself. So anyway, that's the first story of the day. And let's go on to the other two stories. It seems crazy, but let's move on. So the second story of the day is that they've been releasing the names of the most popular kids' names in the United States over the past couple of days, I guess to coincide with Mother's Day. And so while Emma and Noah are the #1 names, it's so weird to transition to these, like, this silly story. All right, but we have to do it. All right, so anyway, the #1 names for boys and girls were Emma and Noah, but the name that made the most headlines was Kylo. Yes, thanks to The Force Awakens, Kylo has jumped from number 3,260, I can't believe it was on the list at all, quite frankly, to 901 in a single year, which is sort of hilarious considering he's most well known for killing one of his parents. It would be like naming your kid Oedipus, and as fans of Greek literature chuckle to themselves, allow me to fill the rest of you in. Oedipus infamously, unknowingly killed his father and slept with his mother, not just one time, but he married her. Yeah, you can't beat the Greeks when it comes to tragedy. But I just think it's absolutely silly and ridiculous that anyone would name their child after Kylo Ren, because again, he abandoned his parents, turned horribly evil, and, you know, killed one of them as a gang initiation, no less. But it is a good sign for Disney, I have to say, because as Episode 8 nears, it shows that there's tremendous support, underground support, I'd say, for Kylo Ren, because Disney hasn't themselves pushed the character that hard. Although I think we're starting to see that change with the ad campaign for Episode 8. He's featured on the poster. They talked about the toys. They had 2 images come out. One was for Rey, the other was for Kylo Ren. We don't know Rey's last name just yet. But anyway, we don't know her parentage, but we of course know Kylo Ren's. But I think he's going to obviously become an anti-hero. I think they're going to go full Zuko with him, of course, that character from The Last Airbender. So again, so weird to transition to that story, but I thought it was certainly very interesting. Then for the third story of the day, I wanted to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, which got a nice boost over the weekend when it revealed that Sir Paul McCartney has a cameo in the film, and they debuted his look with his very own character poster. It did quite well on Twitter, social media. It trended. And, you know, this is something that Pirates has done before with Keith Richards playing Jack Sparrow's father in 2 of the movies. And McCartney isn't the only rock icon to grace the big screen, the silver screen this year. Elton John has a big enough role in Kingsman 2 that he actually gets credited on the poster. The very first poster, not like his own little side character poster. He's ranked with everybody else. He didn't make the trailer cut, though. And also, on a side note, I reported to you that Elton John was quite sick, seriously sick, when I reacted to the Kingsman 2 first trailer. He seems to be recovering very nicely, but he got very sick with a bacterial infection while touring in South America, and it was pretty bad there for a moment. And also, Harry Styles is in Dunkirk, but I don't think that could possibly be that big a role considering how little they've utilized him in the ad campaign. I'm starting to believe that it's very small, which I think was a big mistake. I wouldn't use Harry Styles if I wasn't going to use Harry Styles. But anyway, the other reason this was good to put the Paul McCartney Pirates poster out there, I'm still reeling from this Brad Grey news, but the other important, it's like a huge deal to have someone so major taken out so quickly and suddenly. But anyway, the reason that it's good for Pirates to have this conversation change is that you might have seen, I tweeted it out over the weekend, the Hollywood Reporter's article about Johnny Depp's financial difficulties. It was such as I tweeted, I've never seen momentum for a story like this. It was the #1 article on the Hollywood Reporter website the entire week. through Saturday. That's nuts, because everybody just can't believe that Johnny Depp lost $650 million. In fact, he's actually in debt because his management people, well, this is not his manager as the way Brad Grey was a manager. These are like his lawyer and his accountant. You know, when you're a huge movie star, you have a team of people, and the people in charge of Johnny Depp's finances, you know, there's a legal battle brewing as to whose fault it is that his money is no longer there. So I would check out the article. It's fascinating, and they actually have some behind-the-scenes Pirates gossip about how it was very difficult to get him to set, to the point where they had someone actually parked in a car outside the house that he had rented while filming to let the set know, everybody on set know, and a light went on, you know, because at least he was up, and also that there were fights between the producer of the film, Jerry Bruckheimer, and his agent, Tracy Jacobs, who actually he just recently fired, about who should tell him to act more professional, because neither one of them wanted to do it. And it's interesting, when I tweeted this out, a lot of you have very little sympathy for Johnny Depp in this situation, but, you know, a lot of times in Hollywood, you're surrounded by yes people who don't want to upset you for fear that you'll fire them, like what happened with Tracy Jacobs anyway, because that means they'll stop getting a percentage of your salary. So they just yes man you until you don't bring in any more money, and then they go find another client, and you're just stuck. And I do think that while of course Johnny Depp is partially at fault for sure, you know, he has substance abuse problems, and it's sad that nobody was looking out for him, you know, for his best interests, when clearly he wasn't really capable of doing that himself. You should always, if you can, you really have to look over everything. You know, even if you have a team of people helping you, you have to review it, because things like this happen actually a lot, but not to this degree with $650 million, but it's quite big. But anyway, his sister, you know, there's an argument over whether or not he authorized $7 million worth of loans to her, so she certainly wasn't looking out for his best interest, despite producing many of his projects or working with him. And then also the mother of his children, they were never married, Vanessa Paradis, who he lived with for many years and left for Amber Heard recently. And of course, that we all know how that turned out. But Vanessa Paradis didn't look out for him because of their relationship, and also I'm surprised she didn't even look out, considering that they have children together, and you'd want to safeguard, you know, those children's financial future. So it's a very tragic situation, and it speaks to the culture of Hollywood, I think, as well. And they're saying that there might be ramifications from the case, because apparently lawyers can take a percentage of your salary without any written legal contract, which I think is nuts. And also, I think that it was a little fast and loose in how Johnny Depp agreed to things, you know, just from texting and loose, casual emails. And I think maybe after this case, they'll have a little bit more rigidness in how financials have to be handled, which I think is a good thing for everyone. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. But, you know, at the end of the day, Paul McCartney changed the Pirates conversation, at least momentarily. So anyway, the viewer question comes from BTT viewer General Zod, which I think is quite fitting with the passing of Brad Grey, who of course became a producer himself. So General Zod says, question, hi Grace. I've just discovered your channel this past year. Welcome, and I couldn't be happier. Oh, that makes me feel so nice. You're one of my favorite content creators. I love the science of Hollywood and want to know how to break into being a producer. I loved this because you guys asked me a lot of sometimes about the creative jobs. And being a producer is also creative, by the way, but I like being asked how to be a producer. And also, the path is very unclear. So General Zod says, outside of a degree in production, you can't get a degree in production, what other avenues or similar careers elicit the same type of skills a producer would need? Thanks in advance. Thanks in advance, Grace. Oh, that's so nice of you, General Zod. Okay, I'm glad you want to use your powers of your life for good. You want to turn it around and become a movie producer. All right, so anyway, you can go to film school and get a Bachelor of Fine Arts or a Master's of Fine Arts, and you can study producing there. You can take producing classes, which I would recommend. And then there are a couple of different paths you can take. You can become an agent or a manager, and you can represent people, and then after a couple of years and getting experience and forming relationships, you can go and become a producer, either for one of your clients. If they start their own production company, you can do that, or you can start your own shingle. So that's one way to go. The other way to go is you can go and work for a producer who's already established, and you start out as an intern, you know, somebody who has their own distribution deal with a studio, like Jerry Bruckheimer, Joel Silver, Scott Rudin, Harvey Weinstein, etc. You know, the big names. Go work there, start as an intern while you're still studying. Then you want to get hired as an assistant, then you'll be promoted to development, then assistant producer, and then associate producer, and then you can become a producer in your own right. That's another path. As you can see, it takes a long time to become a producer. You can also go work at a studio, oversee studio interests on movies from the other end. So when Jerry Bruckheimer makes a movie and is producing it, someone from the studio has to oversee it and make sure that the studio's interests are being, again, looked after and that everything's, good from that end. So that's something that you can do. And after a couple of years, you can strike out on your own and produce as well, and you'll already have a relationship with the studio. So sometimes the studio will make a first look deal with you, and they say, "Oh, you did such good work for us. You want to go produce your own movies? Great, we want first dibs to distribute those films." And sometimes they'll give you an office on the lot, which is pretty cool. So that's another way to go. Now you can produce your own indie films if you want, but it's a tough, slow road, and there's no guarantee you'll ever jump to producing mainstream movies, because it would be hard for the movies that you make as an indie producer to really get to the level box office wise that someone would feel capable of allowing you to produce a mainstream film. Talent jumps all the time in front of and behind the camera, but producing has a lot more responsibilities. You have to be very savvy. You have to have a lot of relationships. You have to really know the business. So those are the paths that I would recommend. Again, study producing through a film program. Then you can either be an agent or a manager and work your way up. You can be an intern/assistant at a production company working for an established producer, or you can go through a studio. So those are the three paths. It takes a while, but again, you have to lay the foundation for what is a very important career where there's a lot relying on it, right? You guys talk all the time about who has the most power on a movie. It's really supposed to be the producer. More powerful than the director, more powerful than the actors. The producer is the one that's the driving force, especially considering the financial responsibilities that a picture has. So often they don't do their job. All right, so anyway, wait till we talk about King Arthur. All right, so anyway, on Movie Math today. But that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories, the viewer question from General Zod, any questions that you might have yourself for tomorrow, and any stories that you're interested in discussing. Thanks so much, and condolences, of course, to Brad Grey and his family. All right, thank you so much. You can watch some more episodes right now.